Hey readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire Books, and it's getting into November, but it's time for me to do my reading roundup for October. My October is lighter than the last couple months, but I still read 9 books, and I think that is perfectly good for a month of reading. So the first book I read in October was another Kate Summerscale book. So I read her book about a real-life haunting a couple of months ago, and this time I picked up The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher. And this one was basically a Victorian-era true crime book about a detective who's trying to solve a murder of a young boy in a family. He suspected it was one of the family members, but society at the time wouldn't let him carry out the investigation the way he wanted, called his conclusions into question, messed up his career, and then, it turned out that he was right. So these are all historical events, but what makes it really interesting is that Summerscale does a really good job of digging into the way people were thinking at a given time and like the social structure that allowed events to take place as they did. And I thought that was super interesting. So the other thing that's really cool is she talks about how Mr. Witcher's career and the career of people and the careers of men like him led to novelizations about detectives. So that's how we get Sherlock Holmes. So if you want just kind of interesting insights into another time with a really fascinating murder at the center of all of it, then I actually recommend this book. I thought it was really interesting. After that, I read Beautiful World, Where Are You?, which means that I'm now caught up on the Sally Rooney novels. And this one was interesting because the other two had even more unstable characters, and Beautiful World, Where Are You? Has some of the same themes. There's characters who have a hard time expressing their emotions, a hard time talking about what they really want from each other, and so they end up frustrated and upset. But they're a little bit more mature this time around, and I thought that was sort of an interesting evolution. So she's gone from characters who are just totally lost to characters who might be kind of finding their way a little bit, and I'm curious about where the next novel of hers is going to go for that reason. But if you want to read about complicated emotions and relationships among young people in Ireland, then you will enjoy this book, I think. Especially if you enjoyed her other two. After that, I read what was probably my most anticipated book of the entire year, which was The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. And it was good. I will admit to some disappointment because it was not as good as A Gentleman in Moscow, which remains my absolute favorite of his 3. However, The Lincoln Highway is a really good novel. It's like a reimagining of the American Adventure road trip. It's got a main character who's just gotten out of prison. He accidentally killed someone, and he has to deal with his guilt from that, and he does feel guilt. At the same time, he is trying to take care of his younger brother. Both of their parents are either missing or dead, so that's part of a subplot there. And his journey into normal life is complicated by the fact that 2 of the boys from the center where he was being held kind of snuck away in the warden's car and now want him to do something with them. So that's wild. And the story just gets wilder. My one big complaint about this one, I think, is that there's only one, particularly present female character. This is a very male novel. And I don't know. I felt like she wasn't as well realized as the guys. And this disappointed me more, not because I want necessarily to see perfect representation in every book, but because I know from Rules of Civility that Amor Towles can write interesting women, and he chose not to this time, and I found that a disappointment because I know he can. After that, I read an interesting dramatic book called White Ivy, and it is about this girl who is a Chinese immigrant, and she's moved to the United States. She really idolizes a certain kind of rich, jet-setting lifestyle, and she does everything in her power to eventually get it. And meanwhile, her grandmother has taught her how to shoplift, which is something she carries throughout her life. And I just thought that was a really interesting premise. The cultural tension of someone who is between identities really shows up throughout the book. But at the same time, it's just a very dramatic, fun, kind of transgressive feeling read, and I really enjoyed it. After that, I picked up Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Baart. This was a book of the month pick, and it was okay. It was a thriller about a woman who goes back to her hometown. She's trying to reconnect with her daughter. Her life's kind of messed up, and at the same time, she's still obsessed with a murder that happened during her childhood, and it's a murder of which her brother is the main suspect, even though they could never actually pin it on him. So there's a lot of drama around that, and things from the past get dredged up, but I also felt like there's maybe a little too much going on in this book. And there were places where it kind of fell flat for me. Entertaining, perfectly good, kind of thriller beach read, but I am already forgetting points of the plot, and I read it less than a month ago. After that, I read a compulsively readable novel. I was surprised by how much I liked this one. So I've been watching Book Talk, and so I picked up Verity by Colleen Hoover. And I heard it was kind of a messed up book, and it was. I found it actually a little more predictable than I wanted it to be, although there was an extra fun twist at the end that I did appreciate very much. But it's basically about this woman who... she's an author, she's struggling, her mom's just died, and she gets picked up to ghostwrite the remainder of a really popular series because the author of that series is in a coma, basically, after an accident. And she moves into the house where this woman is, living, such as it is, with her husband and their child, and she's, going through this woman's office, and she starts to fall in love with the husband, and she also starts to find some weird crap in that office. And it's like a really twisted tale of, who is this person really? And where's the line between fiction and reality? And when do you choose to believe something that someone has written down? I thought it was really fun. Actually, I was pretty riveted throughout the whole thing. Interestingly, the opening sequence is kind of gruesome and a weird place to start a book. That was probably the worst part. And then it just went up from there. So get through the first chapter and off you go. After that, I read Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family. I actually read this because he's also the author of the Bad Art Friend piece in the New York Times that was going around in October. And I was just riveted by that piece. I'm not even going to lie. I spent a lot of time thinking about kidney donations and Bad Art Friend and who really was the Bad Art Friend. I would love to discuss this with pretty much anyone. My thoughts continue to evolve on this situation. But I thought that Robert Kolker was probably the biggest winner in that situation because he's a phenomenal writer, and that really showed in the story. I think we were also invested in this situation because Kolker is such a good author. So I picked up Hidden Valley Road. So Hidden Valley Road is a nonfiction book looking into a family that had 11 kids, including, is it 10 kids? Anyway, they have several boys in this family, and 6 of them, I think, turned out to have schizophrenia. And so the family became a really important case study in terms of deciding whether schizophrenia is something that is an issue of nurture or nature, what genetic factors might cause somebody to develop schizophrenia later in their lives. And so it's about scientific arguments that were happening at the time that the family kind of came into view for the scientific community. And it's also very much about the family and how the parents who really had this vision of what their life and their kids were supposed to be like handled the surprise of having several severely mentally ill children. So there's an emotional aspect to it that I thought was it was well done. It's pretty sensitive. Kolker does a good job of talking about the nasty realities of some of the situations that appear in the book. So trigger warning, by the way, for lots of unusual behaviors, but also sexual assault and also people ignoring it. But he did a good job of treating everybody with respect and handling all of this delicately. And for that, I definitely respect him as a writer. So it was really interesting, but it was still tasteful. And I learned a lot, actually, from reading that book. After that, I read Sankofa. And again, this is one of those books where I think maybe a little too much was going on, but overall I really enjoyed it. So there's a lot that I really, really like about this book. The first is that the protagonist is actually this woman in her 50s. She has an adult child. Her husband's cheated on her, and so she's in the middle of maybe divorcing him, but she's deciding what she wants. And, her mother has died. So she goes on a journey of discovery because she finds, so she's never really known her father. She just knows his name. She finds a journal that he wrote when he was in England and when he was with her mom, that details his youth as a student in London. And she really decides she likes that version of her dad. However, she looks him up and it turns out that he's he went to Africa to found a country. He was the first president, but he was president for a really long time, and maybe he was kind of a dictator. So it's a really interesting novel because she's really finding out a lot about who she is. She says to go visit her father. She also has to decide, if he's even someone she wants to know. And that entire journey I thought was really interesting. The drama of it was done really well. Her feelings were handled really well. And I liked seeing a mature character with a growing sense of herself after the rupture in her marriage confront all of this stuff. I would say, however, that there were some aspects of the book that didn't work for me, mostly actually stuff at home. So her trigger warning, her daughter has an eating disorder, potentially, at least did in the past. And that's something that comes up throughout the book, but I'm not really sure it was handled super well. And then some of her issues with her husband, actually those were kind of interesting, but it's almost like her family back home distracts from her journey towards her roots. So the book was a little bit uneven. That said, I really enjoyed reading it, and I actually would recommend it to others as a fun, interesting read that kind of made me think a lot about family and like, what would I forgive my parents for if I knew that they were questioned? And then after that, I read a nonfiction book. So I've been trying to eat better. I feel like a lot of people go through this periodically, but I don't like to diet very much. I really like food. So I've just been kind of looking around, trying to figure out a way to eat that makes me feel confident that I'm making good choices for my body, but also doesn't make me feel like I'm trying to be a rabbit or a bird. I'm a Texas girl, man. Like, the steak and potatoes are going to happen. So I decided to read Health at Every Size by Dr. Linda Bacon. And this was an interesting book. So I am aware there's a lot of controversy about the Health at Every Size movement. Some people really embrace it. Others find it questionable. And the book did not totally help me make a decision about that. There were aspects of the book that I thought were super interesting, and I think that Dr. Bacon is absolutely right about a lot of issues, such as the fact that diet culture is probably really bad for us, that the food industry is definitely screwing us over with the way that they're handling flavors in our food, that we're not eating enough natural food. And so I think the book's general recommendations for like eat more natural food, less processed foods, move more, those are all recommendations that make perfect sense, and I can definitely see myself just trying to do that more often and think about the quality of the food that I'm deciding to eat. However, this is such a weird analogy to use for a book that talks about weight issues and body issues, but I feel like Linda Bacon's trying to have her cake and eat it too. It's like she wants to say that you're going to become healthier, right? But she also says that even if you drastically change your diet and take all the processed food out, you might not lose weight because your body has a natural set point. But I didn't really understand that, because if you've been eating badly for a long time, why wouldn't you just naturally lose weight by starting to eat better and move more? Like, doesn't that seem like that would just happen? But I don't know. At some points I felt like the book had really good advice and was really encouraging. At the other end of the spectrum, I would personally like to lose weight. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to do that. But it was like the book just wanted you to feel better about being exactly where you're at, which for day-to-day life, I get. But for the long term, I don't know about that. I do not know. So I might actually be reading some more books about food just to kind of piece together how I feel about it. Because it felt to me that Bacon wanted to kind of downplay some of the real issues that come from carrying a little too much weight in pursuit of her point. So I'm not sure I'm totally with her, but the book had some good points in it, and it's certainly not as overblown as like people on YouTube would have you think. So that was interesting. So those are the books that I read in October. Not a super dramatic reading month, but hey, I have a whole week off for Thanksgiving the week after next, and let's just say I plan to be making up for some lost time in November. Thanks so much for watching. Please comment with anything you read this past month. Do like and subscribe, and happy reading.